So, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us on this truly momentous occasion to introduce Yale's Nobel laureate, William Nordhaus. I'm Karen Peart with the Yale Office of Public Affairs and Communications, and you may find all press materials regarding this and other announcements on our website at news.yale.edu and also on our Yale social media channels. You may contact me and my colleagues after the news conference to set up one-on-one interviews with Professor Nordhaus. Today, you will hear from the following speakers: Dirk Bergman, Chair of Department of Economics; Ted Snyder, Dean of the Yale School of Management; Kenneth Gillingham, Associate Professor of Environmental and Energy Economics; Tamar Gendler, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences; and finally, Yale President Peter Salovey, who will introduce Professor William Nordhaus, Sterling Professor of Economics and Professor in the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and now the 2018 winner of the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for pioneering the economics of climate change. Please hold any questions until after Professor Nordhaus has concluded his remarks. Thank you, and here is Professor Bergman.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see so many of you here to actually begin with the many students, the faculty of the Department of the School of Management and the School of Forestry, President, Provost, and of course to have Bill here. I should also say Bill should probably take comfort in the fact that Bob Schiller is just sitting across from him, and so ready to give advice of how to make it, through the first few difficult days of being a Nobel Prize winner. So it's an immense pleasure to have heard the news this morning that you have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics together with Paul Romer from NYU for integrating climate innovation into economic growth. Bill's work really speaks to some of the most fundamental and pressing questions of our time, involving the development of the global environment and the economy. Bill has really pioneered since the late 60s, early 70s, a framework, and it's really monumental work in the sense that it stands on its own to understand how the economy and the climate of our planet are mutually dependent. His central concern since the early 70s is basically how growth, output, and more general human welfare may be constrained, in particular may be constrained by the use of fossil fuels. Bill received his bachelor's, his BA in 1963 from Yale University. Just 4 years later, so the PhD student should take note of that. Just 4 years later, he finished a PhD at MIT and came back to be then an assistant professor at Yale. And ever since then, he has been on the faculty of the Department of Economics. Since 2001, he's the Sterling Professor of Economics, the highest academic distinction that you can gather at Yale. We are starting this press conference a little late, but Bill insisted that he wanted to maintain his teaching schedule, and so this morning there was the class of intermediate macroeconomics to teach this year. It actually has the highest enrollment ever, close to 200 students, and so that's the wisdom of the crowd, so the students may have known something that we just learned today. So this is really, really wonderful. And while the prize came out today, really, since the very beginning of his dissertation work under Bob Solow at MIT, Bill was interested in the nature of economic growth, its relationship to technological change. And then since the early 1970s, he became concerned with the role that natural resources can play for economic growth. There were two central papers in 1975 and then in 1977. The later one actually was entitled very aptly, Economic Growth and Climate, the Carbon Dioxide Problem. So that was very, very early on. we'll hear, of course, from him about this work directly. But let me just make a note that beyond the amazing depths of his academic work, Bill has always been a very dedicated public servant. From 1977 to 79, he was a member of the president of the Council of Economic Advisors, and then 10 years later, roughly from 86 to 88, he was the provost of Yale University. And just at the beginning of this year, he became the chair of the Senate of the Faculty of Arts and Science. Today, he remains really the leading economist on climate change. He currently directs a research program, the Yale Climate Change Research Program, an initiative that he just started at the beginning of the year with support from the Coles Foundation and the Macmillan Center for International Studies. It aims to bring together a team of researchers at Yale and elsewhere to develop new data and new modeling tools to sharpen our understanding of climate change and find new concepts for potential cooperation, such as a possibly next Paris Accords. This program emphasizes the interaction among the countries. It works and seeks to work with universities at other countries and attempts to understand the impact that climate change has by using high-resolution economic data. Okay? Just this summer, the Department of Economics received generous funding to create a new Center for Economic Policy, aptly named after another Yale Nobel Prize winner, James Tobin. So it's called the Tobin Center of Economic Policies, and I'm looking forward for Bill's work on the economics of the environment and the global change to become one of the major initiatives of this new center. So there is really very much work to do, but today we're celebrating.
Good to see everyone. This is a great day for economics and a great day for Yale. I'm Ted Snyder. I'm Dean of the School of Management. Congratulations, Professor Nordhaus. I wanted to make two comments that maybe go into a little detail on what Dirk so aptly described as an amazing career. Dirk mentioned Professor Nordhaus's service. And I'd like to just focus on one example of that. He chaired the Yale Carbon Task Force a few years ago. It's a really interesting question. What if the market price for carbon-related products is below the price that we think it ought to be, given potential externalities? What Bill took on was, well, how do institutions who are concerned about that discrepancy adapt their behaviors and correct for overconsumption? So this particular task force got into a lot of nitty-gritty issues, like how are costs distributed through an organization? What happens if you have buildings that are, some are leaky and some are tight? What are the tax effects of trying to correct this? How does the organization have incentives to do, to make adjustments that make sense? Fascinating inquiry, but the point that I find very relevant is that it wasn't just a sideshow to do something for Yale. It reflected his connectivity to problems and solutions. And I think you'll see that thematically throughout his life's work. The second thing I wanted to mention is the way he connects with people about important issues. And one of my favorite examples is in a book on gains from medical research. And it sort of became the Nordhaus question that got asked to all kinds of people. And I'm going to adapt the question a little bit, but it's basically the following. If I look ahead to 2020, and I have the option to have medical technology associated with 2020, but with that, all other goods being back in the 1980s, and I have that as an option, Or I have as the other option, I have all the fancy, all other goods, devices and so on and so forth, the internet, but I have 1980 health technology. Which would I like? And as soon as you ask that question, then it makes the issue that I think was very real accessible to lots of people. Economists don't typically measure the gains from life expectancy, life improvements in life quality, et cetera. But by thinking about it that way, you realize those gains are really important to the gains that we typically do measure. So he has a great ability to ask questions in ways that connect big problems to everyday people and policymakers. So with that, I'd like to, again, congratulate Professor Nordhaus. It's really been a great day, and I look forward to the rest of the comments. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ken Gillingham. I'm an associate professor at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and I'd like to heartily congratulate Bill Nordhaus on this most well-deserved award. Bill's had a profound influence on environmental economics over many years. Bill's development of the DICE model, which was mentioned already in the remarks, revolutionized climate change policy in many ways. There are hundreds of papers out there that are based on the DICE model. And yet Bill's still developing it because he wants to get it right. And it just underscores Bill's meticulousness and care. The DICE model work has even led Bill to coin a new term, the social cost of carbon. When I worked for the White House at one point, when I was working there, we had many debates and discussions about the social cost of carbon. And I've spoken to people around the world, in other countries, in other governments, who also have many debates about this social cost of carbon, just underscoring the profound influence Bill has had. From the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies perspective, we're also honored that Bill has been involved with us over many years. He has a secondary appointment. He's jointly advised PhD students and still is advising PhD students with us. He's worked as a co-author with several of us. I've had the honor to work with Bill as a co-author on several projects, one of the lucky ones. And I've learned so much from Bill. I've been so impressed by his creativity, and I already used the word meticulousness once, but I'll use it again, meticulousness, and joy at the research process, at really understanding what's going on. So with that, I'll say I'm thrilled by this award, and I again want to congratulate Bill on this incredible tribute.
My name is Tamar Gendler. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and in that role, I have the honor of being the Dean to Bill Nordhaus. Bill is a person who is shaped by and has shaped Yale. Bill has spent 55 of his 77 years here at the university. And if he stays 5 more, we will have represented on the wall behind me the number of years, one for each Nordhaus year at Yale. In that time, Bill has been outstanding in each of the 3 dimensions that we ask our faculty to exhibit in his research, in his service, in his teaching. You've already heard from his chair, Dirk Bergman, of his role as provost, of his service as chair of the Senate, of his leadership of so many committees that the term the Nordhaus Report refers to an entire stack of documents. Bill has also excelled in his research epitomizing Yale's commitment to asking fundamental questions that transcend disciplinary boundaries. It's no accident that speaking here today in Bill's honor is the chair of the economics department, the dean of the business school, a faculty member from the School of Forestry, a philosopher, a psychologist, the president of the university. Bill's work draws on the disciplines that constitute this university. And it's characteristic of the border-crossing nature of his work that the work on climate change for which he is being honored begins in Mesopotamia and continues to the present day. Bill is a person who draws on the past to understand the present and to shape the future. And the shaping of the future happens not only through his research, it happens through his extraordinary dedication to teaching. In the last 20 years, Bill has taught 74 courses touching the lives of 3,799 students. And the students whose lives he touches write of this in the course evaluations that they submit. Here are three. Professor Nordhaus is obviously extremely bright. Overall, he tries to be funny and occasionally succeeds. Brilliant lecturer, excellent knowledge, give this man a prize. Well, we have. Bill, congratulations.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Salovey. I'm the president of Yale University. I want to thank Karen and Dirk and Ted and Ken and Tamar for their wonderful comments. I want to thank the members of the media who are here with us this afternoon to help us celebrate and to share this celebration with the world. It's a wonderful day for Yale University. It's obviously a wonderful day for Bill Nordhaus. We're here to celebrate with him, our friend, our colleague, Bill Nordhaus, the Sterling Professor of Economics, professor in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, on this announcement that he is the 2018 recipient of the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. You didn't know that is the name of the Nobel Prize in Economics. Today, Bill joins 60 other Nobel laureates who have brought renown to Yale University. As you've heard from our deans and from faculty colleagues, he is a towering figure in economics, modeling, and policy aspects of climate change. He's best known for his pioneering work in integrated modeling that links economic activity and global climate change. And he's developed approaches that combine economic analysis with Earth systems models. Over his distinguished career, he's worked extensively to estimate the damages from climate change. Beyond his scientific contributions, he is committed to clear and accurate scientific communication on the major controversial aspects of climate change. And most importantly, as you've heard again and again this afternoon, he is a beloved educator and mentor to scores of young scholars. As you heard, he delayed this press conference so that he could teach his seminar. He just didn't want to cancel class. And if you don't cancel it on the day you win a Nobel Prize, you're never going to cancel your class. Bill exemplifies Yale's focus on being a leading global research Bill exemplifies Yale's focus on being a leading global research university at which our preeminent faculty members teach, conduct research, and advance their scholarly work. I would also add, and are great citizens of the university as a whole. At Yale, we are galvanized equally by the academic excellence of our faculty members like Bill and their commitment to educating the next generation of leaders who will serve all sectors of society. From his groundbreaking contributions addressing the economics of climate change to his dedication to teaching, he is inspiring every one of us to realize Yale's mission, which is to improve the world today and for future generations through outstanding research and scholarship, education, preservation, and practice. Yale is proud beyond measure that one of its distinguished alumni and faculty members has been awarded a Nobel Prize in Economics. And I am honored to introduce Bill to you. Bill Nordhaus.
Thank you, and for those remarks, those are just, I don't know who that person is, but it's really nice to hear about him. I suppose, what do you do when a faculty member is speechless? I don't know, that's not a good thing, is it? Well, this is a lovely day. So somebody asked me, when did you hear? And actually, that's a funny story. So being a Yale undergraduate and a student of Keynes, my ambition is to spend the morning in bed. Keynes spent the morning in bed. Of course, he was not just lying there, he was investing the funds for King's College and writing his correspondence and writing articles. But anyway, I slept through it. And at 7 o'clock, I got a call from my daughter and said, "It's so nice." And I said, "What is that?" And that's how I heard. Well, somebody said, "Are you surprised?" Well, of course you're surprised. I mean, there are so many fabulous and brilliant economists around the world, and you have to be a megalomaniac to think that you're the obvious one to be chosen. But I'll tell you what I was really surprised about was Paul Romer. Not for that, not for the reason you're laughing at. I figured it would be the former colleague here, Martin Weitzman, who is actually an extraordinarily brilliant person, or Nick Stern, who's a brilliant economist and probably the best known economist who works on climate change. But Paul Romer had not crossed my mind. The funny thing is, when I started, just to go back a little intellectual history, when I started at MIT, as Dirk mentioned, I was working on we were taught economic growth by the superstars, by Bob Solow, Paul Samuelson, Jim Tobin here, Charlie Koopmans here. But it looked to me as if it was closed. I mean, you can't go and invent quantum mechanics a second time. It looked like everything had been pretty much done. But there were issues about the side effects, and there were also issues about technology. So I started out working on the economics of technological change and how to integrate that in growth models, which is what Paul Romer got the prize for. And I decided after 2 or 3 years it was too hard. And so I just found something simpler, and I decided to do environmental economics and climate change, which is actually much simpler than technology. An interesting thing was between the time I quit, which was about 1967, and the time Paul started working, there were some innovations in methodology, particularly by Joe Stiglitz, another former colleague here, that allowed them to understand how you could integrate technology in a way with imperfect competition. So I was actually very surprised and very honored to have to join with Paul Romer, who has done really pioneering work in that part of economic growth theory. So then, just to move ahead, when I gave up on technological change as being too hard, then I began working with Jim Tobin, and we did a project which we call the Green GDP Project, which was trying to figure out how to integrate non-market activity into our national accounts. And I would say we made a little progress, but not too much progress. But at that point, this was in the early 1970s, when the problems of global environmental change were just, I mean, not just environment, which had already come to the change, but global environmental change was coming to the fore as well. There was a great MIT report about that time. And the climatologists particularly knew about climate change and were becoming concerned in the late 60s and the early 70s. It had not penetrated economics. I remember there was a skit once, an economics department skit, where the graduate students were joking about, I think it was CO2 and the multiplier, which showed how much they knew about both of them. Pache graduate students, it's okay. They're now distinguished professors somewhere. But gradually moved from a joke to a serious concern among economists. But the motivating force in this was the idea that there are externalities, there are these side effects of economic growth, which we are poorly understood. Some of them might be serious, but we don't know until we investigate them and begin to integrate them into our framework. I was particularly taken by Ted's second example of health. Health is it's an interesting example of something that's not included in our measures of GDP. So let's say that our consumption bundles stay the same, but we live 10 years longer, whether in this country or in another country. That actually doesn't get reflected in our output measures. Our per capita GDP, any measure that you know, stays the same, even though we're healthier and we're living longer, and maybe we're happier as well. So that was another example of trying to incorporate environmental or other concerns into our economic thinking. The example Ted used is actually, I thought, was a good one to try to persuade people that this was important. I would, in an audience like this, I would say, okay, I'm going to do the experiment. You can go back to, I used a slightly different time frame. You can go back to 1950 living standards and today's health care, or today's living standards in 1950s healthcare. And then I would ask people, okay, how many would like today's living standards in 1950 healthcare? And invariably, the people under 50 would choose the consumption bundle, and the people over 50 would choose the health bundle. And to which I concluded, at the end of this, I would report this, and I'd say, and I'd also like to report, if I were living with 1950 health care, I wouldn't be here to report on this. So the work on climate change has been, it's been, I'd say, kind of spotty in the sense that it's something that started out, and the problems we faced was there was a climate change science, but there's no climate change economics. There was really no climate change in agriculture. There were no damages. There was no international law with respect to it. There was very little of the economic or the political science or the game theory of treaties. So at the very beginning, there was very good climate science, but there was all these other fields where there were fields there, but they didn't relate to climate change and hardly related to environment at all in the 70s and 80s. So most of the work was going around, and I remember quite distinctly, I would find a climatologist and I say, I know you have this huge model and it's got like 1 million equations, but we can't put 1 million equations in our economic modeling, so how are you going to simplify it? And this was Steve Schneider, if any of you know his name. And he would say, well, like simplify it to what, like to 1,000 equations? I said, no, like two equations. And so usually people would say, oh, that's so funny. You're going to take my discipline and put it in 2 equations. Like, I'm going to be out of business. So, but every once in a while you would find someone who'd do that. And so the way you would do this is then put the different parts together in simple ways. I think the last frontier of this, if I could use that cliche, the last frontier is the international side, and Dirk referred to this a little bit. The climate change problem is unlike most of our problems, like the sulfur dioxide problem or the congestion problem or the water problem, in being an international problem and being what's known as a global public good. And we don't have mechanisms to deal with global public goods. So I think many people, I include people in this field, in the field of whether it's climatology or climate science or economics, have a pretty good handle on how we can handle this for a country, for the United States or for the EU as a group of countries. But the problem is how you're going to bring different countries together. And this is something that is, I think, really plagued this area. And I won't go into the ideas here. There are a few that have been proposed. But this is, I'd say, the last frontier of the climate change. I mean, I think we understand the science. I think we understand the economics of abatement. We understand pretty much enough the damages, but we don't understand how to bring countries together. And that's where we are. I think the real frontier work is going on today. So I'll just finish with one final thought. So I'm here, hello, but I do feel in the background the people who have helped me, who've taught me. I mentioned some of their names before. Paul Samuelson, Bob Solo, this university, Jim Tobin, Challen Koopmans, and others. I'll just mention those 4. And I wouldn't be here, I definitely wouldn't be here at this table, at this occasion without them. But I wouldn't even be there listening, but for this institution. And I think one of the things that is underappreciated is the role of great institutions, or of institutions in general, but great institutions in providing the support, not just financial support, and emotional support and intellectual support for doing the kind of work that this prize recognizes and the other prizes that people recognize. If you look at the names of the people, go back and look at them. They're not living in some South Sea island. Virtually all of them are living in great institutions and working in great institutions and are supported by great institutions. So I would like to, myself, throw back on Yale whatever congratulations you've given me, because I feel very strongly that it's a support of Yale, the people, the institution, the people who've been here before, the people who maintain the standards of the institution, engage in the recruiting of the students, the recruiting of the faculty, the support when they're here, waving fond farewell when they go. I think that's really what I take from this as the most important message that these kinds of prizes should give, not just the substance, but also the importance of the institutions that support them. Thank you.
So if you have any questions, please say your name and your outlet that you're from.
Paul Bass with the New Haven Independent. In your most recent research on the potential of carbon tax, trades, and caps, are you more or less optimistic than you were before that a market solution can really fix climate change or just climate change?
Yeah, so the question is, am I more or less optimistic? Well, I think I'm equally optimistic as I was then. My own view is that there basically is no alternative to a market solution. And the reason is that if you look around, who are we talking about that's going to solve the problem? It's you and me. There are billions of individuals, millions of firms, thousands of governments, hundreds of nations. And for them to take action, they're going to have incentives. And the kind of incentives that we're talking about, they're not speeches. We can sermonize all day, but the incentives of market prices and to raise the prices of goods and services that are carbon intensive and to lower the ones that are less carbon intensive. It's not the only thing to do. I mean, we need to persuade people. We need to educate. It sounds condescending to say educate, but I think we do need to have people realize how important a problem this is, climate change. We need to introduce the right incentives through, and we also need to develop the technologies. All those go together. Whether carbon tax is the only way, no, there are other ways, but I think it's by far the most useful way, the most practical way, the one if it's done right through, as we have at Yale in our carbon charge system, one that rebates the revenues back to consumers. I think it's actually the most durable one and the one that will be most effective.
Susan Haig with the Associated Press. Do you think this award and also the report, the IPCC report, will that give new momentum to a carbon tax?
Yes, I don't know, new momentum, it will help. I think one of the problems is there's so much noise now, particularly in this country, about climate change. It's a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese to help their manufacturing, being one hoax that is particularly ridiculous, given that climate change science was invented in the 19th century. But I think it will help. It's always helpful to have bodies such as the Nobel Committee or such as the IPCC remind us about what the stakes are here. I do think that the carbon tax has not quite caught on yet outside of the economics community. I think if you look within the economics community, the idea of using a carbon tax is pretty prominent, and not just among liberal Democrats, but actually even more so, I think, among Republican economists. So it's really across the spectrum. I think it hasn't penetrated as much as it needs to into other communities. I think many scientists and engineers, coming back to your question a minute ago, have the view that this is something where you just need to implore and exhort people to do things. But I think people are coming around to the view that you need more than that and you need incentives. I might add one thing, which is not obvious about a carbon tax or carbon price. It's not just to raise the price of goods and services like coal-fired electricity, but it also gives incentives to firms to develop new clean technologies. I mean, for example, if you're GE, maybe not the best example of a well-run company, but it is a company that does a lot of energy technology. And if you're GE and see there's high carbon prices coming and that's going to affect coal-fired generation negatively and going to affect wind power positively, then you would put your research and development money into green technologies. So this is not just to get people, consumers like you and me, to pay attention, but in a way, even more importantly, to get companies who do most of the research and development on energy technology to get their attention.
and standards that have been registered. How hopeful are you that we can reverse the effects of climate change, especially given the current administration's policies and backing out of Paris climate accords and such?
Well, I think it's a case of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. This administration won't last forever. I think it's really anomalous in the United States, this degree of hostility to environmental policy and climate change policy. So all I can do is hope that we'll get through this without too much damage. Outside the United States, it's pretty widespread acceptance of the science and even the economics behind the climate change views and climate change policy. So I think we just need to get through what is a difficult period. But I'm extremely confident that will happen. I don't think it's not going to stop climate change. There's a lot of momentum here. It's like a super tanker that it takes a long time to slow it down. But I think it's something we can do.
On that point, Max Reese, NBC Connecticut, to your comment earlier where you said that we don't understand how to bring countries together. Will all those other countries keep working together, you think, even without the United States, given the current administration?
I think it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult to have an international agreement on this subject without the United States participating, and particularly if the United States is hostile. The United States is a big country. It's an influential country. So but I think we'll just have to pick up in a couple of years or whenever it is. What we have in place that we didn't have 10 years or 20 years is scientific understanding. We have measuring systems. We have monitoring systems. We have better understanding of all the systems involved. So we have in place the intellectual infrastructure to do it, but we don't have the policy infrastructure yet. But, what can I say? We don't. Okay. On that hopeful note, thank you.
Question in. Get the question in. Yeah, I can see why his class is so popular. Yeah, to make it very